Welcome to a new episode of Let's Talk Kinesiology. Today I have the honor of speaking with Dr. Wayne Topping, a pioneer in kinesiology and the founder of the Wellness Kinesiology. Originally trained as a geologist, Wayne discovered kinesiology and went on to collaborate with some of the great founders of the field, including John Thie, the creator of Touch for Health. Over the years, he developed the Wellness Kinesiology, a powerful approach to help people identify and release stress, restore balance, and enhance well-being. In this conversation, Wayne will share with us his journey, his encounters with key figures in kinesiology, the challenges and successes of spreading wellness kinesiology internationally, and his vision for the future. So let's dive in. Wayne, I'm so grateful to have you today with me for this special episode of Let's Talk Kinesiology. Are you enjoying your stay in France?
Yes, it's been excellent. To be honest, we've had a wet week, but as I understand, you've had lots of so rain is needed. That has been fantastic. Great group of students, many from France, but we're also from Belgium, from Germany, from Switzerland, things like that. So we're gradually getting more and more people being attracted into this centre in the southern part of France.
Wayne, could you tell us about your beginnings? How did you move from being a geologist to becoming a practitioner and trainer in kinesiology?
Yeah, it seems quite a leap. I'm originally from New Zealand, and New Zealand has lots of volcanoes. I was born just on the northern side of a mountain, a dormant volcano, so I climbed that a lot, became fascinated by geology, went to university. I was going to study forestry, because that seemed like a very practical career, but I did extremely well in geology, did a PhD in geology, working with active and dormant volcanoes. I was going to go to the university for Imperial College in London to study postdoctoral in geology. However, London took a downturn economically, so I went across to Pasadena. And Pasadena is where John Thie was living, in northern Pasadena. He developed Touch for Health, and I accidentally met him in 1976. Took a basic class in geology, in Touch for Health, and began working with it, was fascinated by it, continued teaching geology in Southern California, and then went to University of Oregon, up in Oregon State, up to Bellingham, Western Washington University. But at that time, my last teaching position in geology, there were 200 people who applied for the same job. I was fortunate, I got the job, but I knew there's a lot of competition. It's going to be very hard to stay in geology because mining was depressed. And I had to be honest, I was teaching geology in the evenings and on the weekends, found that fascinating and said, look, I really need to change careers. I've got more interest in this now than I have geology, even though volcanoes are fascinating. I met John Barton, and so I trained with him in 1979 to 80 and became a biokinesiologist. So I left the geology behind, that's a hobby, and then went into kinesiology.
So what fascinated you about kinesiology that made you choose it as your professional path?
Well, in 1976, a friend of mine, we were sharing an apartment together in Pasadena, and he'd gone to this chiropractor, John Thie, and this chiropractor could diagnose what vitamins and minerals he needed, and I said, come on, you can't do that. I'm a scientist. I knew that was impossible. But he said, well, I'm open to it. There's a free lecture tonight given by Richard Dury on Touch for Health. Are you interested in going? And I said, well, okay, I'll go. So I was skeptical, went along. And during the lecture, Richard Dury said, look, I want to volunteer with one shoulder higher than the other. No one volunteered. So he said, okay, everyone stand up. So I stood up, and everyone pointed to me because my right shoulder was higher than my left. So I got volunteered by the group. He tested the latissimus dorsi muscle on the left, which was locked, checked the same muscle on the right-hand side, and it just went weak. And I said, you were pulling harder. You've had that response. Everyone thinks you're pulling harder. No, he said, trust me, I'm not. Then he massaged the neurolymphatic point on the left, and that was painful. I didn't know it was painful, but it was. And then he rechecked the muscle's locked. You're not pulling as hard. That was my reaction. He said, no, trust me, I was. But then everyone said, wow, look at that, because my shoulders are level. I said, wow, I don't know what happened here, But if you can take someone's posture like that, test one muscle, do a very simple correction, and change the posture, I'm all in. I need to learn what this is about. So it's a scientific curiosity that got me involved.
Touch for Health is so incredible. As you said, you work alongside John Thie, the founder of Touch for Health. What were your first impressions when you met him?
First big impression was he was visionary. He'd been training with George Goodhart for quite a number of years, following around like a devotee, and he kept saying, look, George, this material, a lot of it's simple enough, it could be packaged, it could be given to lay people. And finally George Goodhart got sick and tired of that and said, look, John, if you want a book for lay people, you write it. Now that took the wind out of John Thie's sails for a while, but eventually he had a family. And together with that family, one was an editor, one was a writer, one was a publisher, and collectively that entire family with John Thie put together the Touch for Health manual. So he pulled it together and he had all of them working together and it came out. And so the idea was this was simple enough, it could be taught to lay people, you could have one person in the family balancing other people out, and you could avoid a lot of the healthcare costs that we had in America at the time. So that was the idea. It was big picture. He said he would be only satisfied once you had one Touch for Health practitioner on every corner. Now that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the idea is we want lots of people out there teaching Touch for Health, teaching people simple skills they can use to benefit the family. And that was his approach.
And this is really something we need to develop here in France. All right, Wayne, this is the fun part of the episode. If I give you some, could you share a meaningful encounter of anecdotes with him? All right, so, John Barton.
Now, that's interesting because I was at the University of Oregon as a visiting professor, and one of the students I'd met had heard of this health encounter. I mean, it was a bunch of hippies actually in Southern Oregon that were all getting together displaying different types of alternative healthcare. So I went down with him and we met John Barton. And I was fascinated by the fact that if a muscle was out of balance, he had about 14 different ways, not just neurolymphatics, neurovasculars, meridians, but he worked with lots of different types of nutrients, amino acids, herbs, vitamins, minerals, that sort of thing, essences. But he worked with biokinetic exercises, which is physical technique. He worked a lot with emotions, and that fascinated me. So he had, as I said, about 14 different ways to bring something into balance. So again, it was my scientific curiosity that got me hooked. I need to know this because it's fascinating. You can take a part of the body that's out of balance, and there's so many different ways to get in there to balance it. And it was so much bigger than the worldview I had with Touch for Health. So that's what attracted me to his material.
So you talked about emotions. Good transition to Stokes.
Yes, yeah. Well, Gordon Stokes, actually, he's probably under-recognized in a lot of ways, but Gordon Stokes was the one that taught me Touch for Health. Back in 1976, Touch for Health consisted of a 2-day class, then you went straight into an instructor training class. I mean, and we only had 35 muscles in those days. We didn't have 42. The others appeared a little bit later on. And at that time, the approach was to balance the muscle, check the muscles and balance them, upper body upper body front, body, turn the person over on the massage table, upper body, lower body, more structural type approach. And Gordon Stokes was the one that brought in a lot of the traditional Chinese medicine into Touch for Health. He was instrumental in a lot of that. And John Thie's was he took the applied kinesiology material but wrapped it up and put it into a meridian balancing, because that was not part of applied kinesiology. Yes, they had the meridians that were associated with the muscles, but they were not balancing meridians as we do in Touch for Health. So once you have the wheel, which is not in the original Touch for Health book, or the 5 elements, then we had ways of balancing the body energetically rather structurally as in applied kinesiology.
All right, how about Whiteside?
I didn't know as much about Daniel. I met him just on a couple of occasions. They were quite opposite, Gordon and Daniel, together. conceived a lot of things. From what I know, that was one that was pushing for all these different manuals that got produced, and Gordon's have probably helped balance them out. And he was deeply into the personology, the face language, and so brought a lot of that structural work into 3-in-1. Candace, I never met, the three of them. But I did take some classes early on from Gordon and knew him because he was my touch health instructor. In fact, we had him come up to Bellingham early on to start teaching outside of California.
Led you to develop a specific approach around stress?
Well, as I was using Touch for Health, I did lots of balancing on various people. I found that probably the simplest technique in Touch for Health was the one that was most effective. That's stress release. And when you think about it, if someone comes in, they've had an accident, you can do stress release as they go through chronologically the different things that occur during the accident. But then you can actually put people into the position they're in during the accident and trigger a body-related memory that did not show up if you just thought about it. And yet that's incredibly simple. And with stress release, you can deal with issues from the past, you can deal with the present, you can deal with the future. However, I found that sometimes the person would think about something stressful, the indicator muscle, such as pectoralis major clavicle, would unlock, do simple stress release, and then the muscle would lock. However, the person would say, but I'm still feeling queasy, I'm still feeling some upset in the stomach. So I had evidence that there's still stress in the body, but muscle testing wasn't showing it. So then I was forced to look for ways to dig deeper to get access to the stress that was there, and that's why we developed the eye rotation technique and holding the emotional finger mode as ways to dig deeper. And then we started working with statements, because when you use statements, you can check an indicator muscle on the left to get feedback from the right hemisphere, indicator muscle on the right to get feedback from the left hemisphere, and sometimes you find that there's disagreement between the two hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere says, logically, yes, I want to do this. The emotional brain is saying, no way. So there's conflict. So then we came up with a brain integration, which was an idea that I got from anchoring technique, comes out of neurolinguistic programming and part of Denison laterality repattern, when you bring both hands together to help cement in the change. And so it grew out of those techniques. And so I developed this very small class called stress release, which allowed us to dig deeper. And then I started combining it with the emotions that I learned in John Barton's biochemistry, where we had tens and tens, well over 100 different emotions associated with 20 main meridians, not 12 as we do in Touch for Health, but 20, the 8 extra meridians and the 12 regular meridians. And so that then allowed us a way to go through, circulocalize 53 different organ reflexes associated with all the body, find out which one was priority, track down the specific emotions we need to work with. We can then balance out the emotions and balance out the organs. And so that became a class which we called Work with Emotions. Then we took the technique that had been developed by, Roger Callahan, which is the 5-minute phobia, which was basically tapping on stomach 1 to get rid of anxiety, phobias, that type of thing. And then looking at the 5 elements, you can then predict which particular meridian endpoints you need to tap in order to get rid of other stuck emotions, anger, depression, that type of thing. And so we had a 1-day class diffusing stuck emotions. And so this began to build up a little core of classes which we called stress relief. The Touch Valve tree was put out, which was pioneered by Jim Reed, who was in Las Vegas at the time. I was stuck out on a branch called Stress Release, because that was the name of one of my books that I wrote back in 1985. And I thought, well, if people are going to say what I'm doing is called stress release, I need to get ahead of the game and come up with another name for what I'm developing. So I started looking at the alphabet. A couldn't be used because that was applied kinesiology. B was biokinesiology and behavioral kinesiology. C was clinical kinesiology. So then I just wrote down all the letters of the alphabet that hadn't been used, and there were very few left. It was like the scraps. Then I looked at W, wellness. That's it. It's not too specific. It's not like emotional kinesiology or structural kinesiology. It's broader than that, but it embodies what we're after. We're looking for wellness. We're looking for contentment and inner peace, all those sorts of things, without being too specific. And that was the origin of wellness kinesiology. Then I had three people that were really interested in my work. Dominique Manette, who was in Belgium, a medical doctor by background, Rosemary Sonderegger from Switzerland, and Aria Den Hertog. They said, well, we love what you're doing, Wayne, but we see that you need some help. So we're willing to become your faculty and help spread what you're doing within Europe. And that was the origin of Wellness Kinesiology and our first faculty.
And what were the first reactions from the public and practitioners when you introduced Wellness Kinesiology as a new approach?
Well, we got no real resistance because it was simple enough, it was easy enough for them to add what they were learning from us to what they were already doing. If it had been difficult, then we would have gotten some resistance, but it wasn't difficult. Geology, the stress release techniques are simple, very easily applicable, and it doesn't really matter what a person presents with. You have a way in which you can make a meaningful difference in their lives in one session. That's basically what people are looking for, and so it wasn't too difficult to sell it. And if you take a look at, say, biokinetic exercise, once people know Touch for Health, if they took a class on biokinetic exercise, they learn a very simple technique which can be easily added to what they're doing. It doesn't contradict, it doesn't interfere with what they're doing, but it gives them one more approach. And so as long as we can add additional value to what people are doing, we don't get resistance and people welcome it.
In France, wellness kinesiology is particularly represented by Flore Bosch. What are your thoughts on the development of your method through her and French practitioners?
Well, I love what Flore is doing. She has the advantage that she's married to a medical doctor by background who's now trained in acupuncture as well. And so here what they've got is a little centre being developed, which is where people can come in and stay. That way you're not in a huge city, you're out in the countryside, you can go to markets, get fresh produce each day. Usually, apart from this past week, it's sunshine, so big table spread outside, people all eat together, they bring in delicacies from this area, so it's a nice nurturing environment here that they have. And so people come here and they can focus in on what they're learning. And they have such a gentle approach, very welcoming approach. It's easy to learn, and you've got Frake's medical type background as well, and they've got other contacts which they'll be able to tap into, which will further develop. So I like what they're doing. I think it has a great future, and we're going to get more and more people pulled into this part of France to take training.
Looking back, what is your perspective on the evolution of kinesiology worldwide?
Well, at first, kinesiology was just among chiropractors primarily. In America, you had to have a license to diagnose to call yourself an applied kinesiologist. Some people want to keep it that way, unfortunately. However, John C. had a bigger picture than that. He said, no, a lot of this is simple enough. Lay people can deal with it, and learn from it, profit from it. He had a lot of resistance at first from the chiropractors because they didn't want this to be given to lay people. I think they saw the pie as being a limited-sized pie of sick people, and they didn't want lay people coming in and taking parts of the pie away from them. Narrow approach, because actually, if people learn Touch for Health, they're more likely to go to chiropractors because they're already looking at alternative ways of addressing health issues rather than just the medical, which is more pharmaceutical and surgical. And so, let's see, back to the original question, what is the approach? So, yes, he was the one that really opened it up and allowed lay people that had previous backgrounds to come in, learn kinesiological techniques, and adapt them in various types of ways and to get them out in the world. So Touch for Health has been a great foundation, very solid, but from that you can go into the learning disability area, you can go into nutritional now, you can go into more advanced structural, you can go in lots of different directions. Yes, he was big picture, got it out to the world, and laid a good solid foundation. He is also very smart. Before he died, he handed the Touch for Health over to a group of faculty members that formed the IKC, the International Kinesiology College. And the International College was given a mandate. He said, I want you to protect this material, it, and make sure it conforms from country. So if someone came to you, Asma, and took touch valve 1, then they came to Floor to take touch valve 2, she should be able to assume that you've taught certain content in touch valve 1, and then Floor, if the student after taking touch valve 2 from Floor goes back to you, you should be able to assume that Floor covers certain material in touch valve 2. And that pretty much exists in most parts of the world for people that are allied with the IKC. Now, some people have run off with these sort of things and merged them, which muddies the water up. But IKC, we just had a conference in Assisi, Italy, just about 3 weeks ago. And you had people from all around the world there. We had a retreat beforehand. And one of the things we're doing right now, which is exciting, is the touch valve has been in existence for about 50 years. In the process of upgrading, we've been working on it for about 3 years, about 6 of us. And by the end of this year, we propose to have touch 1, 2, 3, and 4 in complete new manuals. So upgraded drawings, and changes in some of the muscle tests, a little bit more accuracy with some changes in the meridian path, relocation of some of the alarm points to where they should be according to traditional Chinese medicine, that type of thing. So the manuals will be more up-to-date, more accurate, and therefore appeal more to, some of us when we teach, we have acupuncturists in class. And acupuncturists want to see that the meridians and alarm points are where they know that they should be. So that's a big change, and that also will help further spread and keep this uniformity that we need within the kinesiological world. But yeah, I think Touch for Health has made a bigger impact on the world than applied kinesiology has, because that's been among the practitioners, and that's the therapeutic type. But once you get into Touch for Health, the emphasis has been different. It's been let's train people to get out there, teach classes, and spread this knowledge at a grassroots level, which ultimately has a bigger impact on the world than if you keep it locked up in a practitioner model. That makes sense?
You just talk about upgrading the manuals. What other projects you're still carrying forward today with the IKC, Touch for Health? Are there any research, trainings, or publications in progress?
Yes, I've just finished teaching 2 classes here, one on sleep and one on the immune system. It's the last time I've worked on 2 at the same time, because as a 2, that's a huge topic. Because when you look at the immune system, it's the obvious one. We've just gone through a period of pandemic, and that people that survived the virus and the pandemic had probably had a good diet and some nutritional awareness, because it's vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, selenium, some of those that made people more vulnerable to the virus, or having chronic degenerative, which can lead to maybe magnesium deficiency as an underwriting cause. So that's part of the immune system. But then we have people with an overactive immune system when they react to things like pollens and dust, which is not normal. Most people don't react to those, but some do. Then we have a whole area called autoimmune conditions, where the body starts attacking Hashimoto's disease and lupus and multiple sclerosis. Then we have another type of immune problem, which is where you have chronic degenerative, a lot of inflammation going on inside the body's wearing out. Those are all related to the immune system, because the immune system is supposed to keep us healthy. And so that's a huge topic. Right now it's a 2-day class. It needs to be modified. It'll be improved a great deal over the next few times I teach it. Then sleep is totally different. Sleep is underrated. Most people think, well, you go to sleep, you get rested, but they don't really appreciate what happens. One of the major things that happens when you sleep is the brain is less occupied with thinking about what you're doing from the cerebral, but it's able to house clean. The lymphatic system can take a lot of the waste products so they don't accumulate within the brain, because if they accumulate within the brain, then you head it on towards neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, etc. And that's all involved with both the immune system and also sleep. So those are 2 projects I'm working on currently. I've just started teaching. And I've got other projects I'm working on, like protocols for the knee. A manual a number of years ago, muscles and tendons for the hip and thigh, had 66 different specific. Now, for each of those tissues, I'm looking for neurolymphatic points, neurovascular points, spinal reflexes, and that takes lots and lots of research, working with lots of people to be able to track all the muscles we have in Touch for Health, but then think of doing that tens and tens of times for other tissues. That's a huge job. So, yeah, I've got more than enough to keep me occupied for the next 20 years or so.
This is great. Actually, this is one of the most important questions for me. What advice can you give the new generation of French kinesiologists?
Well, the Touch for Health is, as I said, the foundation, so I'd recommend that's a good starting point for the average person. But if all you're going to be doing is Touch for Health, you're not going to be able to address all the needs people have when they come to you. So it's like practitioners are going to need to take training in other disciplines. Because the triangle of health structure, and a lot of touch health is structural. You test muscles, you massage reflex points, you manipulate the muscles, do origin insertion, work with spindle cells. That's all in the structural area. We do some stress release, the emotions, stress release. We have awareness of the emotions from a 5-element perspective when we're doing balances, but we don't really take a deep dive into the emotions. So there's lots of material out there. We have lots of courses in wellness, for example, just in the emotional arena. Then you've got the whole area of nutritional. In France, Belgium, some of these countries, people steered well clear of nutrition because they're too afraid of being accused of practicing medicine without a license. Now, if you don't address nutrition, then you're not addressing some of the major causes of illness, because vitamin C is water soluble. It has to be in the diet. If it's not, you're going to suffer consequences. If someone has a viral infection, they need to know that vitamin D is one of the most important things that will protect you, and you need zinc to get inside the cell to stop viruses from replicating. So people need to have basic knowledge like that. So there's a need for some training in the nutritional area so people can see obvious nutrient deficiencies that show up in their face. For example, if you came into me, if you went to a medical doctor and you wanted to find out what your magnesium is, they could check for it in the blood. It's about 1% in the blood. That's not going to give you a realistic picture of what your status is in terms of magnesium. However, once people looked at all the magnesium deficiencies, they start recognizing, well, when you're deficient in magnesium, you have cramping, you have spasming, you have seizures, those sorts of overly contracted states. Calcium contracts, but magnesium has to relax. If you're ticklish, there'll be too much tension in the muscles. That's probably magnesium deficiency. Get the idea? So when you look at all the symptoms of magnesium, that's probably a more accurate way of telling you that this person is probably deficient in magnesium and really needs to look at adding more green vegetables and other sources of magnesium into their diet to take care of a basic nutrient deficiency that underrides lots of chronic disease. So I'd say, yes, back to your question, if people take just touch health by itself, yes, they can bring about a lot of changes, but they don't have enough information to be able to address a lot of what comes into them by way of the client. But once they start taking a broader range of kinesiology courses, they can flesh out their background, reinforce it with courses focusing on nutrition, emotions, etc. And that way, far more tools available to address the needs of the client.
Wayne, if you had to summarize wellness kinesiology in what sentence, what would it be?
That's an interesting one. I've already used up my sentence, right? I'm coming from a scientific background, so I like looking at everything available and simplifying it. So I'd say I'm interested in teaching techniques that are simple and effective. Simple and effective. And it is possible. I mentioned stress release. That's an incredibly simple technique. Very effective. The more you know about it, the more you can apply it. So I'd say the thing I'm looking for in wellness kinesiology, primarily a simple, effective tool.
Finally, what message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I'd say when you've taken your touch health training, because most of them that's what they're doing, that's not the end of your education. That really should be the start of your education. Get in there, work, get good results, but then get further training in different areas. And what we should be doing as kinesiologists is continuing our education, because there's more and more research, more and more skills being adapted that make us more effective as practitioners. So don't see the touch health instructor as the end result, actually a step in your evolution as a kinesiologist, and take further training so you can be better able to help your clients.
I always like to give building a house analogy. We need the foundations, but if we just stick with the foundations, we'll not have the house. So we need to continue building.
Exactly.
To actually live inside.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for sharing your inspiring journey and the story behind the creation of the Wellness Kinesiology.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Osma.
To our listeners, we hope this conversation gave you a deeper understanding of kinesiology and that it encouraged you to explore the tools and approaches that resonates with you. Until next time, take care and keep exploring the amazing potential of your body and mind. Thank you again, Wayne.
Yeah, you're most welcome. It's a pleasure meeting you and wish you well with all your future podcasts.